The black SUV came to a smooth stop on the hot asphalt, the engine ticking softly as it cooled down in the California sun. It was a quiet afternoon at the private aviation terminal, the kind of day where the heat seemed to rise off the ground in visible waves, distorting the horizon. Inside the car, the air conditioning had been blasting, keeping the world at a comfortable distance, but the moment the door opened, that wall of protection vanished. Keanu Reeves stepped out, pulling a pair of sunglasses over his eyes to shield him from the bright, unyielding light. He didn't look like a movie star in that moment. He didn't have an entourage, and he wasn't wearing a designer suit meant to be photographed. He was dressed in a simple, well-worn t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and boots that had seen better days. He reached back into the vehicle to grab his only piece of luggage, a simple, dark canvas duffel bag that looked like it had been traveling the world with him for decades. The zipper was slightly stuck on one corner, a detail he noticed with a faint, tired smirk as he tugged it free. He slung the strap over his shoulder, the weight of it familiar and grounding. This wasn't a trip for glamour or premiere. This was a departure from the noise, a chance to breathe before the next chaotic cycle of his life began. He had just finished a grueling 4-month shoot. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, and his mind was full of lines from a script he had been reciting in his sleep for weeks. As he closed the car door with a solid thud, the driver gave him a respectful nod. No words were exchanged. There was no need for pleasantries or small talk. Keanu offered a small, appreciative nod in return and watched the car drive away, leaving him alone in the vast expanse of the tarmac. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing in the air. It smelled of aviation fuel and hot rubber, a scent that usually signaled a transition, a movement from one life to another. He enjoyed these rare moments of solitude in public places. It was a strange paradox to be a household face, yet feel invisible when the context changed. Here, among the machines and the crew, he was just a passenger. He began to walk toward the sleek, white private jet waiting for him near the hangar. It was a beautiful machine, gleaming in the sunlight, standing out against the dull gray of the pavement and the pale blue of the sky. The stairs were already lowered, the cabin door open like a welcoming mouth. To anyone else, this scene might represent the pinnacle of success, but to Keanu, right now, it just represented a soft seat and silence. He was looking forward to putting his head back, closing his eyes, and letting the hum of the engine drown out the noise of the industry for a few hours. The walk to the plane felt longer than usual. The heat was oppressive, pressing down on his shoulders. He could feel a thin layer of sweat forming on his back under the canvas bag. He kept his head down, watching his boots hit the ground, focusing on the rhythm of his own steps. Left, right, left, right. It was a way to center himself, to push away the lingering stress of production he had just left behind. He thought about the messy ending of the shoot, the rewrites, the long nights, and the constant pressure beyond. He thought about how much he missed just riding his motorcycle without a destination, feeling the wind instead of the glare of studio lights. A ground crew member, a young man in a bright orange vest, was standing near the nose of the aircraft. He saw Keanu approaching and quickly stopped what he was doing, standing up straighter and giving a quick, respectful salute. Keanu noticed this and slowed his pace. He didn't ignore the young man. He pulled his sunglasses down slightly so the guy could see his eyes, offering a genuine, warm smile. "Hot day, isn't it?" Keanu said, his voice raspy and low. The young man seemed surprised that the actor was speaking to him, not just acknowledging him, but actually talking. "Yes, sir. It's burning out here today," the young man replied, his nervousness showing. "Drink plenty of water," Keanu said gently, patting him on the shoulder as he passed by. "Stay safe." It was a small interaction, barely 30 seconds, but the young man's face lit up as if he'd just been handed a gold bar. That was the thing about Keanu. He understood that a moment of kindness could last longer than a movie. He continued toward the stairs, his fatigue pulling at him now. The pilot, a tall man with graying temples and a crisp uniform, was waiting at the bottom of the metal steps. He was checking a clipboard, looking efficient and professional. As Keanu got closer, the pilot snapped the clipboard shut and tucked it under his arm, stepping forward to greet him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reeves," the pilot said, his voice calm and steady, the kind of voice you wanted to hear before flying 30,000 feet in the air. "We are all fueled up and ready to go. The weather is clear all the way to New York. Should be a smooth flight. Keanu nodded, grateful for the news. That sounds perfect, he replied, really looking forward to sitting down. He shifted the weight of his bag, the strap digging into his shoulder muscle. He could feel the cool air conditioning flowing out of the open cabin door, mixing with the hot air outside. It was a tease of the comfort waiting just a few feet away. The plane sat there, silent and powerful, the metal stairs gleaming silver. There were no heavy wooden doors to navigate here, no grand lobbies, just the open sky and the path to freedom. He stepped up to the bottom of the stairs. The metal felt warm under the sole of his boot, solid and reassuring. He placed his hand on the railing, gripping it tightly. He was so close. Just a few more steps and he could disappear into the cabin, shed his public persona, and just be. He glanced back one last time at the terminal building in the distance. The glass sliding doors were reflecting the sun, so brightly they looked like mirrors. He saw a few people moving around inside, blurry figures living their own lives, dealing with their own struggles. For a second, he felt a strange pull, a hesitation that had nothing to do with fatigue. It was a fleeting sense that he was leaving something unfinished, though he knew logically that his work was done. The pilot watched him, waiting for him to ascend. The silence between them was comfortable, unforced. The pilot checked his watch again, a subconscious habit of someone who values time and precision. "Whenever you're ready, sir," the pilot added softly, mistaking Keanu's pause for simple tiredness. Keanu took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the hot, heavy air. He lifted his right foot and placed it firmly on the second step. The engine wasn't running yet, but the auxiliary power unit was whirring quietly, a sound that promised movement. He was about to climb the rest of the way, about to leave the ground and the heat behind. His mind was already drifting toward the book in his pocket and the water bottle waiting in his seat. He was ready to go, but just as he shifted his weight to climb higher, the pilot didn't step back to allow him passage. Instead, the pilot took a small, deliberate step forward. It was an aggressive move, but it was enough to block Keanu's path gently. The pilot's expression had changed from a professional mask to something more hesitant, more human. He looked past Keanu, toward the hangar, and then back at the actor's face. The comfortable silence broke, replaced by a sudden, unspoken tension. The pilot reached out a hand, palm open, not to touch Keanu, but to signal a stop. The whir of the plane system seemed to get louder in the quiet space between them. Keanu paused, his boot resting on the step, his hand gripping the rail, and looked down at the pilot. The urgency to leave, the desperate need for rest, suddenly collided with something else. The pilot opened his mouth to speak, the words hanging in the heavy air, ready to change the entire direction of the day. Keanu remained frozen, his right boot hovering just above the second metal step. The sudden barrier of the pilot's arm wasn't aggressive, but was firm enough to stop his momentum completely. The air conditioning from the plane's open door continued to wash over them, mixing with the heat rising from the tarmac, creating a strange, swirling temperature around the stairs. Keanu looked at the pilot's face, searching for a sign of mechanical failure or security threat. He saw neither. Instead, he saw a look of uncomfortable hesitation. The pilot, a man who usually commanded the sky with absolute authority, was now shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting away from Keanu's gaze and toward the large glass structure of the terminal building they had just walked away from. "Is there a problem with the engines?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but carrying a note of concern. He let his foot drop back down to the hot pavement, standing firmly on the ground again. He tightened his grip on the strap of his duffel bag, ready to move if there was danger. The pilot shook his head quickly, clearing his throat. "No, Mr. Reeves. The aircraft is perfect. We are cleared for takeoff. The weather is ideal." He paused, taking a breath as if he was preparing to say something he wasn't supposed to say. "It is not a mechanical issue. It is something else." The silence between them stretched out, filled only by the distant hum of a ground power unit and the quiet chirping of unseen birds hiding in the sparse landscaping near the fence. Keanu waited. He was used to people being nervous around him, but this was different. This wasn't a fan trembling with excitement. This was a professional man wrestling with a moral dilemma. The pilot took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair, looking momentarily defeated. "I know you are tired, and I know you're on a tight schedule," the pilot began, his voice lower now, private. "But there is a situation inside the terminal. My crew, they held a family back. They stopped them from coming out to the tarmac." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. He turned his head, glancing back at the building. The glass doors were too far away to see through clearly, reflecting the bright blue sky and the white clouds. "Who are they?" Keanu asked. "Fans? Press." "No, not press," the pilot said firmly. "The father is a mechanic here. He has worked at this hangar for over 15 years. He's a good man. He helps keep these birds in the air. He's here with his wife and their young son." The pilot stopped again, the words seeming to stick in his throat. He looked down at his polished shoes, then back up at Keanu with a pained expression. "The boy is in a wheelchair, sir. He is very sick." Keanu felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with exhaustion. He didn't move. He just listened. "The family heard you were departing today," the pilot continued, his voice gaining a bit of speed now that he had started. "The boy, he is a massive fan. He knows all your movies. He wanted to come out just for a moment, just to see you, to say hello. But the ground security team, they were doing their job. They wanted to ensure you boarded quickly and safely. They didn't want a crowd or scene. So they stopped the family at the glass doors. They told them they couldn't approach the aircraft." The pilot gestured helplessly toward the building. "I saw it happen as I was doing the pre-flight check. I saw the boy's face. He wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't screaming or being rude. He was just crying. He was sitting there in his chair, looking out at this plane, knowing you were on it, and he broke down." The father was trying to comfort him, but you could see he was heartbroken too. Keanu looked past the pilot, staring at the empty space between the jet and the terminal. The distance wasn't far, maybe 100 yards, but in that moment, it felt like a massive divide. On this side, there was luxury, comfort, and escape. On the other side, behind those reflective glass doors, there was a sick child and a family desperate for a spark of joy. "They didn't ask for an autograph or a selfie," the pilot added, his voice cracking slightly. "They just wanted him to see you." The father told the security guard that it might be the last trip they make for a while. The pilot looked at Keanu, his eyes pleading. "I didn't feel right taking off. I didn't feel right leaving them standing there while we flew off to New York in comfort. It didn't seem like the right thing to do." Keanu stood very still. The fatigue he had been feeling just a moment ago, the aching muscles, the desire for sleep, the need to escape, suddenly felt very small. He thought about the boy. He thought about the unfairness of life, how some people got to fly in private jets while others couldn't even walk. He knew about pain. He knew about loss. It wasn't an abstract concept to him. It was a place he had lived in for a long time. The airplane behind them let out a soft beep, an automated system warning that the parking brake was engaged. The sound snapped Keanu back to the present moment. He looked at the pilot. He saw a man who was willing to risk his job or annoy a high-profile client just to do a decent thing. That kind of courage was rare. "You did the right thing telling me," Keanu said quietly. He adjusted the strap of his bag, but he didn't turn toward the plane. He kept his eyes on the terminal. "I can make an announcement," the pilot offered quickly. "I can tell security to let them through. Or I can have the car brought back around if you prefer to stay here. I thought you should have the choice." Keanu looked at the open cabin door of the jet. It led to a soft leather seat, a cold drink, and peace. It led away from the noise and the sadness of the world. If he stepped up those stairs, he would be justified. He was tired. He had paid for privacy. He was allowed to leave. But as he stood there, the image of a boy crying behind a glass door played in his mind. He couldn't unsee it. He couldn't unhear the pilot's description of the father's defeated posture. He thought about his own sister, the battles she had fought. He thought about how much a simple moment of connection meant when you were in the middle of a dark time. It wasn't about being a movie star. It wasn't about being famous. It was about being a human, seeing another human being in pain. Where are they now? Keanu asked, his voice steady and stronger than before. "They are still inside," the pilot answered, pointing to a set of large glass sliding doors near the main entrance. They are sitting on a bench just inside the observation area. The boy is facing the window. Keanu nodded slowly. He turned his body fully away from the airplane. The luxury of the jet, the promise of rest, the schedule that demanded his presence in New York, all of it seemed to fade into the background noise. The only thing that mattered was the bench inside the terminal. The only thing that mattered was the crying child. "Turn the engine off," Keanu said. It wasn't a request, and it wasn't an order barked in anger. It was a simple statement of intent. The pilot blinked, surprised by the immediacy of the decision. "Sir, if we shut down now, the delay might—" "Turn it off," Keanu repeated gently. He looked the pilot in the eye, a small, determined smile touching his lips. "I'm not getting on that plane yet." The pilot hesitated for only a fraction of a second before a wide grin broke across his face. He nodded vigorously, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Keanu didn't watch the pilot climb the stairs to the cockpit. He was already moving. He tightened his grip on his duffel bag, not because he was carrying on to the plane, but because he needed to hold on to something. He began to walk back across the hot tarmac, away from the private jet, away from the easy path, and toward the glass doors where a difficult, heartbreaking, but important moment was waiting. The sun was still blazing down, the heat still rising, but Keanu didn't feel the weight of it anymore. He felt a sense of clarity, a sudden burst of energy that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with purpose. He was going back. The sound of the auxiliary power unit winding down was a slow, fading whine that seemed to take the tension out of the air with it. As the noise dropped, the heavy quiet of the airfield returned, broken only by the soft crunch of Keanu's boots on the hot asphalt. He didn't look back at the plane. He didn't need to see the pilot giving a thumbs up from the cockpit window or the ground crew pausing their work to watch him. He kept his eyes forward, locked on the glass structure in the distance. The decision felt heavier than his duffel bag, but it was a good kind of heavy, a solid, meaningful weight. As he walked away from the private jet, the luxury of it seemed to fade into the background. The sleek, white machine became just another object on the field. The further he walked, the less he felt like a celebrity rushing to an appointment, and the more he felt like a man approaching a human moment. The heat was still intense, radiating up from the ground, but he didn't mind it anymore. It felt real. It felt grounded. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder, taking his time. There was no rush now. The schedule had been broken, and strangely, that felt like a relief. Reaching the end of the tarmac, he approached the sliding glass doors of the terminal. They were large and reflective, acting like a mirror to the world outside. As the sensor picked up his movement, the doors parted with a soft hiss, welcoming him back into the cool, artificially chilled air of the building. The temperature change was immediate, raising goosebumps on his arms. The smell of jet fuel vanished, replaced by the faint, sterile scent of industrial cleaning solution and the stale aroma of coffee from a vending machine in the corner. The private terminal was mostly empty, which was typical for this time of day. The walls were painted in neutral beige, and the chairs were lined up in neat rows, most of them unoccupied. It was a place designed for transitions, not for lingering. But in the far corner, near the large observation windows, the atmosphere was different. It was thick with emotion. Keanu spotted them immediately. Even from a distance, he could see the slump of the father's shoulders and the way the mother leaned in close, speaking softly to the child in the wheelchair. They were a small island of sadness in the middle of the bright, clean room. They were facing the window, looking out at the tarmac and the plane that sat silently in the distance. They couldn't see Keanu standing by the entrance. They only saw the machine that was leaving without them. Keanu paused for a moment to observe them. He didn't want to startle them. The boy looked smaller than he had imagined, frail beneath a thin blanket that covered his legs. A cap was pulled low over his eyes, perhaps to hide the hair loss, or maybe just to shade against the glare of the sun coming through the glass. The father wore a dark uniform shirt with a patch on the chest, the logo of the ground crew. He was wiping his eyes with a rough tissue, trying to be strong for his family, but clearly failing. Taking a deep breath, Keanu began to walk across the polished floor. His footsteps were quiet, the the scuff of his boots barely audible against the low hum of the building's air conditioning. He didn't call out. He didn't wave his arms to get attention. He just walked toward them with a slow, deliberate pace. As he got closer, the details of his situation became clearer. There was a backpack on the floor filled with medical supplies, and the mother's hand was gripping the boy's armrest so tightly her knuckles were white. The father was the first to notice someone approaching. He turned his head, perhaps expecting a security guard to tell him they had to leave, or a pilot asking them to move. When he saw Keanu Reeves walking toward them, his eyes went wide. He froze, the tissue halfway to his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked past Keanu, as if checking to see if there was a camera crew following him. But there was no one. It was just Keanu, alone with his duffel bag. By the time Keanu reached the bench, the mother had looked up too. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that seemed to suck the air out of the space between them. She squeezed her son's arm, whispering something frantic, but the boy didn't move. He kept his head down, staring at his lap, perhaps assuming it was just another staff member telling them it was time to go. Keanu didn't stand in front of them like a statue or a celebrity. He didn't wait for them to stand up and greet him. He saw the distance between his height and the boy's wheelchair, and he immediately closed it. He stepped to the side of the chair and slowly lowered himself down. It wasn't a graceful drop. It was a tired, human movement. He bent his knees and sank to the floor, resting one knee on the carpet. He didn't care about the dust or the dirt. He didn't care about his jeans. He positioned himself so he was eye level with the boy. He placed his duffel bag on the floor beside him and leaned in, his elbows resting on his knees. "Hi there," Keanu said softly. His voice was gentle, stripped of any actorly projection. It was just a quiet greeting in a quiet room. The boy slowly lifted his head. He pushed the brim of his cap up. When he saw Keanu's face, saw the familiar beard and the tired, kind eyes, his jaw dropped. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered shock. The tears that had been drying on his cheeks began to well up again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of disbelief. The father was still standing, looking awkward and overwhelmed. "Mr. Reeves," he stammered, his voice shaking. We didn't mean to hold you up. I told them not to bother you. I'm so sorry." Keanu looked up at the father and offered a warm, reassuring smile. He shook his head slightly. "Please don't apologize," Keanu said. "I'm the one who is sorry I didn't come over sooner." He turned his attention back to the boy, holding out a hand. "I'm Keanu. It is really good to meet you." The boy looked at the hand, then up at his parents as if asking for permission. The mother nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face now. The boy reached out a small, pale hand and shook Keanu's hand. His grip was weak, but his smile was wide. It was a smile that lit up his entire face, chasing away the pallor of sickness for a brief, shining moment. "I saw you on the plane," the boy whispered, his voice raspy. "I thought you were leaving." Keanu leaned in closer, lowering his voice to match the boy's. "I was going to," he admitted, "but the pilot told me I was missing the most important part of the trip before I even took off. He told me there was a cool guy over here I needed to meet." The boy let out a small, incredulous laugh. He looked down at his lap, shy but incredibly happy. The tension that had been holding the family together seemed to dissolve. The father finally sat down on the bench next to his wife, putting his arm around her shoulders. They watched the interaction in awe, witnessing their son being treated not like a patient, but like a friend. Keanu didn't rush. He didn't look at his watch. He didn't glance toward the window to check on the plane. He was fully present, sitting on the hard floor of the terminal, ignoring the cold air and the uncomfortable position. He asked the boy about his favorite video games, listening intently as the boy spoke with growing enthusiasm. He asked about the patch on the father's shirt, complimenting him on keeping everyone safe. He made a point to include the parents, looking them in the eye, validating their struggle and their love for their child without ever making it pity. For the first time all day, the terminal didn't feel like a place of transit. It felt like a living room. The distance between the movie star and the mechanic, the healthy and the sick, the rich and the struggling, had all collapsed into a simple conversation on the floor. Keanu had made a choice not just to stop boarding the plane, but to board a different kind of journey, one that required no ticket, just an open heart. The hard carpet of the terminal floor was not exactly comfortable, but Keanu didn't seem to notice. He had shifted his weight so that he was resting on one hip, his knee drawn up close to his chest, creating a relaxed circle of space between himself and the boy. The air conditioning vent above them was blowing a steady stream of cool air, but the atmosphere in that small corner felt warm, insulated by the genuine connection forming between them. The rest of the busy airport, the pending flight, and the waiting crew faded into the background, becoming nothing more than white noise. The boy, whose energy had been so low just minutes ago, was now sitting up straighter in his wheelchair. His eyes, which had been dull and filled with a haze of pain and medication, were now bright and locked onto Keanu's face. He was talking about his favorite video game, describing a level that he had beaten recently despite having to use only one hand to hold the controller due to 4 lines he was usually tethered to. Most adults would have nodded politely, pretending to understand, their eyes glazing over at the talk of digital monsters and high scores. But Keanu listened with intense focus. He asked questions about the strategies the boy used. He winced when the boy described a difficult boss battle, and he laughed when the boy explained how he tricked the game's artificial intelligence. "That sounds intense," Keanu said, shaking his head in admiration. "I tried playing that one on the plane ride over here, and I couldn't even get past the first 10 minutes. You're putting me to shame, kid." The boy beamed, a flush of pride rising to his cheeks. It wasn't just that a movie star was listening to him. It was that this man was treating his expertise as valid and impressive in a world where the boy was often defined by his illness. Seen only as the patient in the chair, Keanu saw him as a master, a gamer, a peer. The mother and father sat on the bench nearby, watching the scene unfold. The mother had stopped crying, though she still clutched a crumpled tissue in her hand. Her husband had his arm wrapped around her, and for the first time in a long while, the lines of worry on his face seemed to soften. They weren't interjecting or trying to take photos. They were just breathing, soaking in the sight of their son being happy. The father caught Keanu's eye for a moment and mouthed the words, "Thank you," but Keanu just gave a slight, humble nod, returning his attention immediately to the boy. He didn't want the credit. He just wanted the moment to last. After a while, the conversation shifted from video games to movies. The boy hesitated, looking down at his hands, before asking the question that had been on his mind since he saw Keanu walk through the door. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked quietly. "When you get hit in the movies, when you fall off buildings?" Keanu didn't dismiss the question with a Hollywood, it's-all-magic answer. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Honestly? Yeah, sometimes it hurts a lot." He rubbed his own shoulder, remembering an old injury. "I try to make it look like I'm made of steel, but the next day, I definitely feel it. I wake up sore and I'm like, why did I agree to jump off that bridge?" The boy giggled, the sound light and musical in the quiet terminal. "But here's the secret," Keanu continued, raising an eyebrow playfully. "The pain is just part of telling the story. It's worth it to get the scene right, like you playing that game with one hand. It was hard, right? But beating the level felt good." The boy nodded vigorously. "Exactly. It's the same thing. We just do it on a bigger screen." The boy looked at Keanu's arms, noticing the leather wristband he wore. It was a simple, braided band, dark with age and worn smooth at the edges. It looked like a piece of armor, or maybe a talisman. The boy reached out a tentative finger, touching the leather lightly. "That's cool," he murmured. Keanu looked down at the boy's hand. He saw the thinness of the wrist, the faint bruises from needles, the fragility of the bone structure. Without a word, Keanu unhooked the clasp of the wristband. He slipped it off his own wrist and held it in his palm for a moment, looking at it. It had traveled the world with him. It had been through action scenes and long flights, through quiet nights and busy days. "I want you to have this," Keanu said, extending his hand toward the boy. The boy pulled his hand back quickly, shaking his head. "No, I can't. It's yours." "I have plenty of them," Keanu lied gently. He didn't have plenty. This was his favorite. But he knew it belonged here now. "Seriously, I think it would look much better on you than it does on me. Consider it a good luck charm. For the next level. And for everything else you have to beat." The boy looked up at his parents. The mother was crying again, But she was smiling now. The father nodded, giving his son permission. Slowly, the boy held out his wrist. Keanu gently fastened the clasp, adjusting the fit, so it wouldn't slip off the small arm. He squeezed the boy's hand gently before letting go. "There we go," Keanu said, sitting back and admiring the way it looked. "Perfect fit. That looks tough." The boy stared at the wristband, turning his arm back and forth, watching the light catch the worn leather. He ran his thumb over the braid, treating it like a sacred object. It was a physical link to a hero, a tangible piece of strength that he could wear. It wasn't just a gift. It was a transfer of resilience. They sat there for a few more minutes, not needing to say anything. The silence was comfortable. Keanu asked about the father's job at the hangar, listening to him explain the intricacies of fixing the landing gear on the jets. He treated the mechanic with the same respect he treated the boy, validating the man's hard work and skill. It was a seamless dance of conversation, moving from the child to the parents, making everyone feel seen and valued. Time seemed to suspend itself in that corner of the terminal. The hustle of the airport continued around them, but it was as if they were in a bubble. The pilot had been true to his word. No security guards came to usher them away. No staff members interrupted to ask for autographs. It was just the four of them, sharing a slice of humanity, in a place usually defined by schedules and transactions. Eventually, the boy's energy began to wane. The excitement of the meeting, while uplifting, was also exhausting for a body that was fighting so hard to heal. His eyelids started to droop, and he leaned his head back against the wheelchair, his hand still resting on the leather wristband. Keanu noticed the fatigue immediately. He knew it was time to let them rest. He didn't want to overstay his welcome and drain the boy's limited energy. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, groaning slightly as his knees popped. The movement signaled the end of the visit, and a subtle wave of sadness passed through the small group. "I should let you guys get going," Keanu said softly, brushing the dust off the seat of his jeans. "I've kept you here long enough." The father stood up immediately, extending his hand. "Mr. Reeves, I don't even know what to say. You didn't have to do this. You have a plane to catch." Keanu took the father's hand, gripping it firmly with both of his hands. He looked the man in the eye, his expression serious and sincere. "I didn't have a choice," Keanu said. "Trust me, this was the most important thing I had to do today. More important than any flight." He turned to the mother, who gave him a fragile hug. She whispered her gratitude into his shoulder, and he patted her back gently, whispering back that she was strong and doing an amazing job. Finally, he looked down at the boy, who was blinking heavily, fighting sleep. "Hey, take care of that wristband for me, okay?" Keanu said, "And keep beating those levels." The boy smiled a sleepy, contented expression. "I will," he whispered. "Thanks, Keanu." "Anytime," Keanu replied. He stood there for a moment longer, looking at the family, etching the memory of this moment into his mind. He felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that no amount of movie success or money could ever buy. He had walked off the plane tired and empty, and he was walking away feeling full. With a final wave, Keanu turned around. The walk back toward the sliding glass doors and the tarmac felt different now. The air conditioning felt colder against his skin, waking him up, but his heart was warm. He was ready to leave, but he knew that part of him would always remain in that corner, sitting on the floor with a brave kid wearing a leather band. The walk back across the tarmac felt different than the walk away from it. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long, stretching shadows across the pavement. The air was still hot, but the biting edge had gone out of it. Keanu moved with a slower pace, his boots scuffing softly against the ground. The duffel bag on his shoulder felt lighter, as if the physical weight had been replaced by something else, something invisible but significant. As he approached the plane, the pilot was standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. He wasn't checking his watch anymore. He was just standing there, his hands clasped behind his back, watching Keanu approach with a look of quiet respect. When Keanu got close, the pilot didn't ask if everything was okay. He didn't ask if they were behind schedule. He simply stepped aside and gestured toward the open cabin door, a silent invitation that acknowledged what had just happened mattered more than any flight plan. "Thank you for waiting," Keanu said as he reached the steps. He didn't just mean for the engine, The pilot shook his head slightly, a small, knowing smile on his face. "It was the right thing to do, sir. I'm glad we didn't take off." Keanu nodded and climbed the metal stairs. This time, he didn't feel the desperate need to escape. He felt a sense of calm. As he stepped into the cabin, the cool air washed over him again. The flight attendant, who had been busy preparing the galley, looked up, surprised to see him. She quickly composed herself, ready to apologize for the delay. But one look at Keanu's face stopped her. He didn't look annoyed or rushed. He looked peaceful. He took his seat, a plush leather chair that faced the front of the plane. Usually, he would close his eyes immediately, eager to block out the world. But today he didn't. He looked out the window. The ground crew was finishing their final checks. In the distance, he could see the glass sliding doors of the terminal. They were just reflective rectangles from this height, but he knew exactly where that family was sitting. He imagined the boy looking down at the wristband, maybe showing it to a nurse later that evening. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for departure. We hope you enjoy the flight." The engines roared to life, a vibration that hummed to the floor and into the soles of Keanu's boots. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, picking up speed, Keanu rested his arm on the armrest. His hand felt strangely light. He was so used to the weight of the leather braided band around his wrist that its absence was a constant, gentle reminder of the afternoon. He watched the terminal buildings blur past, then the runway vanish, and finally, the ground drop away as they lifted into the sky. For the next few hours, the plane cut through the clouds. The attendant brought him a drink, but he barely touched it. He spent most of the time looking out the window at the vast, empty landscape below. His mind wasn't on the movie he had just finished or the press junkets waiting for him in New York. He was thinking about the fragility of life and how easily we miss the important moments because we are too focused on the schedule. He realized that if the pilot hadn't stopped him, if he had just kept walking up those stairs 10 minutes earlier, he would be sipping this drink and feeling satisfied about being on time. But his soul would have been a little emptier. He had saved a few minutes, but he would have lost a memory that would last a lifetime. Weeks passed. The blur of life resumed. Keanu moved from city to city, from hotel to hotel. The day at the airport became a distant memory, a quiet story he kept to himself. He didn't post about it on social media. He didn't mention it in interviews. It felt sacred, something that belonged to him and the family in the terminal. One afternoon, while he was back at his home, soaring through a stack of mail that had accumulated during his travels, he found a plain white envelope mixed in with the bills and fan letters. It didn't have a studio logo on it. It didn't have a fancy return address. It was just a handwritten note. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was a careful, slightly shaky print of the mechanic father. Keanu sat down at his kitchen table, holding the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. He read it slowly. The father wrote to tell him that the boy had passed away 2 days after their meeting at the airport. The reading was heavy with grief, but it was also filled with immense gratitude. The father explained that the last week of his son's life had been very hard, full of pain and fear. But after that day at the terminal, something had changed. The boy had stopped asking why me, and had started wearing the wristband every single moment, even sleeping with it on. He had told his parents that he wasn't just a sick kid anymore. He was a friend of Keanu Reeves. He had gone to sleep that final night, holding the leather band, telling his father that he wasn't afraid anymore because he knew he was tough. The letter ended with the father thanking Keanu for getting off the plane. He wrote that while the world saw Keanu as a big movie star, their family would always remember him as the man who knelt on the floor and gave them time. Keanu folded the letter and placed it on the table in front of him. The house was completely silent. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange light through the windows, but inside, Keanu felt a chill. He wasn't crying, but he felt a profound sense of sadness mixed with a strange kind of peace. He looked down at his own wrist, which was bare now. He realized that the band hadn't just been a gift. It had been a transfer of strength. The boy had taken it, and in return, he had left Keanu with a lesson that no acting coach could ever teach. He sat there for a long time, thinking about the irony of the situation. He had been stopped from boarding a plane. He had been delayed. He had been inconvenienced. In the world of Hollywood, time was money, and delays were disasters. But in the real world, in the world of human hearts, that delay had been the most important thing he did all year. It had changed the ending of a young boy's story. It had given the grieving parents a final memory of their son, smiling instead of crying. Keanu stood up and walked over to a small box on a shelf where he kept keepsakes. Photographs of his sister, old scripts, small mementos from his life. He took the letter and placed it gently inside the box. He didn't need the letter to remember the day, but he wanted to keep the father's word safe. Walking back to the window, he watched the city lights flicker on in the gathering dusk. He thought about the pilot, the hesitation, the choice to step off the path. Life was a series of doors and choices. We rush through them, trying to get to the next destination, convinced that what lies ahead is always more important than what is right in front of us. We get angry when we are stopped. We get frustrated when things don't go to plan. But as he stood there, looking out at the world, Keanu knew the truth. Sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is missing your flight. Sometimes, the most important destination isn't a city on a map, but a moment on the floor of an airport terminal. He had gone to the airport that day to fly away, but he had actually arrived exactly where he needed to be. The engine had stopped. The schedule had broken. And because of that, a life had ended with a little more joy than it would have had otherwise. And for Keanu, that was a success worth more than any box office record. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and finally, he felt ready to move on to the next part of his journey, carrying the memory of that day like a quiet, enduring light.